Tom slammed the nurse call button 3 times in a row. The light outside his room flashed again. May looked up from her phone in the hallway. Ron, you got him. Ron almost choked on his coffee. Hell no, your turn. May rolled her eyes. I was there 2 times today already. Ron pointed toward Tom's room without even looking. I rather deal with a fat guy than him. May snorted, same. The call light kept blinking. Neither of them moved. Inside the room Tom yelled, I know y'all see that light. Ron whispered, see, this why nobody wanna come down this hallway. May laughed under her breath. Last time I went in there he complained the pudding was emotionally cold. What does that even mean? Tom hit the button again. Beep beep beep. Ron stared at the ceiling. If we stay quiet maybe he think the system broken. Then another voice came from the nurse's station. Why is room 214 going crazy again? It was Sam, rolling up in his power chair with a soda in his lap. May pointed instantly, your friend. Sam looked at both of them. Oh no, I already did my emotional support shift today. Tom shouted again from inside the room. Ron. Ron froze. How he know I'm out here? May started laughing harder. He got demon powers. The call light stopped for a second. Everybody relaxed. Then Tom screamed. I heard that too, May. Ron dropped his coffee. Nah, I'm quitting. Will came down the hallway pushing Ben's wheelchair slowly beside him. Ben looked half asleep, hoodie pulled over his head while holding a bag of chips in his lap. At the nurse's station, May and Ron were still standing there arguing about whose turn it was to deal with Tom. Will stopped in front of them. Will typed on his phone, do you know where Tom's room is? May and Ron both blinked rapidly like they had just seen a ghost. Ron pointed down the hallway slowly, you want Tom, husband sock the third. May burst out laughing, that ain't his real title. Will looked confused for a second. Will typed, yes. Ron leaned closer. You know he nuts right. Ben suddenly started coughing trying not to laugh. Will nodded calmly. Will typed, I know now his room. Ron pointed toward the far end of the hall. Last door on the left, follow the screaming. Before Will rolled away, he stopped and looked back at them seriously. Will typed, don't tell Tom that the nurses call him nuts. May immediately covered her mouth trying not to laugh again. Ron raised both hands. Oh nah, I'm not getting involved in whatever relationship y'all got. Ben looked at Ron, you already involved. From down the hallway came another loud smack of the nurse call button. Beep beep beep. Tom's voice echoed. If this pudding cold again I'm calling corporate. Will sighed. Ben whispered good luck. Ron muttered, man walking into a war zone voluntarily. Will walked into the room quietly while Ben stayed near the doorway watching everything like it was live TV. Tom was sitting up in bed, arms crossed hard, nurse call button still in his hand like a weapon. The pudding cup sat untouched on the tray. Tom looked furious. These nurses are neglectful. Will moved closer carefully. Will typed, Tom you need to relax. Tom pointed toward the hallway dramatically. Relax, they ignored me for 20 minutes. Ben looked at the clock on the wall. It'd been like 4. Tom ignored him completely. They act like I'm annoying. From outside the room, Ron whispered loudly to May. Because you are. Tom instantly turned toward the door. I heard that. Ron disappeared from the doorway at record speed. Will rubbed his forehead tired already. Tom kept going. People forget my family own this dump. The room went silent. Ben slowly looked around the old building. The ceiling leaking in 3 spots. Tom waved his hand proudly anyway. Exactly historic. Will tried not to laugh. Will typed, you fighting nurses over pudding again. Tom looked offended. It's not about the pudding anymore, it's about respect. At that exact moment, the pudding slid off the tray and splattered on the floor. Everybody stared at it. Ben whispered the pudding gave up. Will looked down at Ben and sighed. Will typed no point let's go. Ben nodded slowly and turned the wheelchair toward the door. Before they could leave, Tom spoke quieter than before. Will stopped. Tom looked down at his blanket instead of at them. You know when my family is home from holiday. The room got awkwardly still. They would bring me home then. Will paused for a second. Will typed I don't know. Tom stared at the wall. They went at the beginning of summer, and it's almost done. Even Ben stopped joking around. Tom gave a small shrug like he was trying to act like it did not matter. Never mind. He picked up the remote but did not turn the TV on. Go and close the door. Will looked at him for another second before backing out quietly. Ben reached over and shut the door softly behind them. Out in the hallway, the nurse call light finally stayed off. Will rolled slowly down the hallway in his power wheelchair, the soft hum filling the quiet corridor. Ben walked beside him, hands in his hoodie pockets, glancing back once toward Tom's room. Will typed, "I know him, he's spoiled but he never been real but now." Ben frowned a little, like he didn't like how true that sounded. They kept moving. Ben finally spoke up, lowering his voice. Will, his family came home last month. Will didn't stop the chair but his grip tightened slightly. Will typed, "I know but it's not my business to share, let's go." Ben nodded, accepting it, and kept walking beside him. For a while, it was just the sound of wheels and footsteps. Behind them down the hall, Tom's door stayed closed. No yelling, no call button, just silence that felt heavier than the noise. Ben glanced sideways at Will. "You think he actually doesn't know?" Will didn't answer right away. He looked straight ahead, guiding the wheelchair toward the exit. The hospital lights flickered slightly above them, like they were tired too. Ben sighed quietly. People act different when they feel left behind. Will slowed just a little at that, but still didn't turn around. The doors at the end of the hall came into view, automatic, sliding, open space beyond. And behind them, for once, no one was calling them back. Todd's FaceTime popped up on Ben's phone just as they reached the elevator. Ben answered it and flipped the camera around slightly so Will could see too. Todd looked tired, like he had been dealing with something all day. "All right, how was it?" Todd asked. Will paused, then typed quickly while Ben watched over his shoulder. Will typed, "Dad, his family lied to us." Todd's expression shifted immediately from casual to confused. "Lied, what do you mean?" Will glanced down the hall before replying, like he didn't want anyone overhearing. Will typed, "They didn't see Tom when they came home." Ben leaned closer to the phone. "It's worse than that, he thinks they're still on vacation." Todd frowned hard now. "Wait, what?" Will nodded slightly, confirming it. Will typed, "Tom thinks his family's still on vacation." There was a long pause on the call. Todd rubbed his face with his hand like he was trying to process it all. "So nobody told him they came back?" Ben shook his head, apparently not. The elevator dinged open behind them. Will started rolling forward slowly, the wheelchair turning toward the exit doors again. Todd's voice came through the phone, quieter now. "All right, stay with him, don't escalate it, I'll figure out what's going on." Ben looked at Will, then back at the phone. Will just typed one more line before ending it. Will typed, "We leaving now." Todd immediately called Rachel. She picked up after a few seconds, sounding irritated before he even spoke. "What is going on?" Todd asked, trying to stay calm. Rachel didn't hesitate. Rachel said, "Last I checked I never had sex with you, so you are not Tom's father. One more call from you and I'm getting a restraining order." Todd froze for a second, stunned by how fast it escalated. "Wait, what? I'm not calling about that, your son Tom." Rachel's tone didn't change. Rachel said, "You my son, not yours, stay out of my business." Todd rubbed his forehead, trying to reset the conversation. "Listen, he thinks you guys are still on vacation. Nobody told him you came home." There was a pause on the line. Then Rachel let out a short, cold laugh. Rachel said, "Okay, it isn't my problem, he is 22, so that is his issue, not mine." Todd went quiet. The words sat heavy in the phone. He glanced at Ben and Will standing nearby, both listening without saying anything. "Rachel, he's sitting in a hospital room thinking his family disappeared on him." Rachel didn't respond for a moment, then her voice came back flat and final. "I don't care." The call ended. The line went dead. Todd lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen like he expected it to change. Ben exhaled quietly, "That's actually it." Will didn't type right away, he just looked down the hallway in the direction of Tom's room. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it was heavy enough that nobody wanted to break it first. Will stood still for a moment, watching the hallway lights flicker softly overhead. Ben didn't say anything, just waited. Todd was still on the phone screen, silent now, like he didn't know what to say either. Will finally typed. Will typed Tom was always been abandoned, but he realized it today. Ben looked at the message and then away, jaw tightening a little, not arguing, just thinking. Todd exhaled through his nose, low and heavy. That's a big thing to say, Todd said quietly, and it's not something you just label someone with. Will didn't respond right away. The hallway felt longer than before, like the building itself was listening. Ben spoke up gently. He didn't realize it until today, though. That's the part that's messing with him. Todd nodded slightly on the screen, more to himself than anyone else. Then we deal with what he feels, not just what we think happened. Will looked down at his hands on the wheelchair controls. For once, he didn't immediately type. Down the hall, Tom's room was still closed. No yelling, no buts. Just quiet. And somehow, that was worse than everything before it. The next day, the hospital felt different, quieter, like something had already been decided before anyone showed up. Ron was at the nurse's station going through paperwork when David walked in. David looked tired but focused, like he had already been dealing with calls all morning. He stopped in front of Ron. Tom husband sock the third. Ron looked up slowly. David continued, I'm his brother. My parents have been calling you lot, kept getting weird calls. I'm here to get him moved. Ron leaned back in his chair a bit, nodding like he expected this. He's ready, Ron said, his stuff's already packed. David blinked, already. Ron shrugged, yeah, he's been preparing for it longer than people think. A brief silence passed between them. David rubbed the back of his neck. Right, cheers, mate. Ron gave a small nod back. No worries, he's been waiting for someone to actually show up with answers. Down the hallway, a suitcase sat neatly by Tom's door. The call button light was off. For the first time in a long while, no one was arguing about whose turn it was to go in. It was just before 5 a.m. when David finally reached Tom's room. The hallway lights were dim, the kind that made everything feel half real. Tom was still asleep in the wheelchair, head tilted slightly to one side, blanket pulled up awkwardly like he'd fallen asleep mid-argument with the world. David stood there for a second, taking it in. Tom, are you ready to go? He said softly. Tom barely moved. A long pause. Then, without really opening his eyes, Tom mumbled, okay. And just like that, he went back to sleep. David blinked once, then sighed through his nose like, of course this is how this goes. All right then, he muttered. He gently adjusted the wheelchair handles and started pushing. Two nurses walked alongside them, already finishing discharge paperwork, moving with that early morning efficiency that only happens when everyone wants to go back to bed. They reached the elevator where a small stack of Tom's belongings had already been placed into a transport trunk. One nurse glanced toward the wheelchair parked nearby, Tom's power chair. What about his power chair? She asked. David looked over at it, then at Tom, who was still half asleep in the manual chair being pushed. Tom lifted his head just slightly, eyes still closed. We don't need it, he mumbled. Give it to you guys as donation. The nurse hesitated. Are you sure? Tom didn't even open his eyes. Yeah, I'll take it. David raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He said take it. Ron, passing by with a clipboard, gave a small nod. That's the most peaceful discharge I've ever seen from that room. The elevator dinged open. David wheeled him inside. As the doors closed, Tom finally shifted again, settling deeper into the chair. And for the first time in a long while, nobody hit a nurse call but. As the elevator doors closed behind David and Tom, the hallway went quiet for a full second, like the whole building was processing what had just happened. Then May broke first. She turned toward Ron, eyes wide with disbelief. He's gone. Ron stared at the closed elevator doors like he didn't trust them. Then he exhaled slow. He's gone. May suddenly smiled, then started laughing in relief. He's gone, he's actually gone. Ron blinked, then it hit him too. He let out a laugh and started clapping once like he wasn't sure what else to do with his hands. He's gone. May spun a little in place, doing a small victory dance right there at the nurse's station. He's gone, he's gone, he's gone. Ron joined in, half laughing, half chanting, packing in a small circle like he couldn't believe the shift in atmosphere. He's gone, he's gone. May pointed down the hall like she was announcing it to the entire building. Peace has RTORNED. Ron stopped for a second, looked up at the ceiling like he was addressing something higher. Thank you, God. May doubled over laughing. Don't say it too loud, he might come back out of spite. Ron shook his head, still smiling. If he comes back, I'm quitting on the spot. They both slowed down a bit, catching their breath, the adrenaline fading into tired relief. For the first time in a long time, the nurse call light stayed dark. And the hallway didn't feel like a battlefield anymore, just a hallway again. Will and Ben came back to the building just after midday. The elevator doors slid open, and instantly it hit them. Music. Laughter. People talking over each other. It wasn't the usual tense, half-worried hospital energy anymore. It felt like someone had lifted a weight off the whole place. Ben stepped out first, blinking. Why does it feel like a party in here? Will rolled out behind him in his power chair, scanning the lobby. People were actually smiling. Someone had even brought snacks to the nurse's station. Will paused and typed, holding his phone up. Will typed a 24-hour change. Ben let out a low whistle. Yeah, something definitely changed. Suddenly, the overhead loudspeaker crackled on. Attention staff, who's gone? There was a beat of silence. Then, from multiple directions, nurses, staff, even a few patients down the hall, people shouted back at once. Tom is gone. The echo bounced through the lobby. A couple people cheered, someone actually clapped. The music got turned up louder like it was confirmation. Ben looked at Will, half shocked, half amused. They really said it like a holiday announcement. Will didn't type immediately, he just looked around at the relief in the room. For once, nobody was rushing toward a call button. No blinking lights. No shouting from down the hall. Just noise that felt normal. And Will slowly rolled forward into the building that finally felt different. Will slowed his power chair near the hallway entrance, then tapped on his phone while Ben walked beside him. Will typed, Ben, his power chair in there. Ben frowned, what in there where? Will pointed down the corridor toward the storage room near the nurse's station. Ben followed where Will was pointing. They walked past the now relaxed nurse's station. May was laughing with someone. Ron was leaning back in his chair like he hadn't slept properly in days but finally didn't care. At the end of the hall, a storage door was slightly open. Inside, against the wall, sat Tom's old power chair. Ben stopped. They actually kept it. Will rolled a little closer and nodded. Ben stepped inside, looking it over. It was cleaned up, no longer plugged in like it had been officially retired from service. Ben shook his head. Feels weird seeing it like this. Will typed again. Will typed, he said, donate it. Ben let out a small laugh. Yeah, sounds like him. From behind them, Ron called out casually, yeah, we weren't gonna argue with that decision. May added from the station, best donation we've ever gotten. Ben leaned on the doorframe, looking at the chair one last time. Man really came in here like a storm and left like a memo. Will didn't respond, just turned his chair back toward the exit. And this time nobody stopped them. Will paused near the storage room doorway and typed, looking between Ron and Ben. Will typed, why Tom donate his chair? Ron rubbed the back of his neck like he wasn't sure how deep into this he wanted to go. He was asleep, Ron said. His brother handled it. Ben frowned, wait, what? Ron nodded toward the hallway. It was like 4 a.m. He was half asleep in the wheelchair. Brother said they were moving him, no space in the new house or something like that. Ben's expression tightened, so Tom didn't actually decide it properly. Ron hesitated, he said take it. Will looked up from his phone, waiting. Ron added more quietly, and his mum told us not to tell him too much detail. That landed heavier. Ben scoffed under his breath, so he thinks he chose it. Ron didn't argue, he just shrugged. Look, I just work here, I follow what I'm told. A brief silence followed. The storage room felt suddenly less funny, less party energy, and more complicated. Will typed again, slower this time. Will typed, Tom knew that as was happening. Ron shook his head, not fully, not really. Ben exhaled, yeah, that's messed up. Down the hall, the noise from the nurse's station continued, laughter, music, but it felt further away now. And the chair sitting in the storage room didn't feel like a donation anymore. Just something left behind too quickly. Ben and Will stood there for a moment in the doorway of the storage room, the noise from the nurse's station faint in the background. Ben's expression had shifted from curious to uncomfortable. Will looked down at his phone and typed carefully. Will typed his family playing this, he was asleep, so he didn't consent to any of it. Ben read it and frowned deeper. Yeah, Ben said quietly, that's not really okay if he wasn't fully aware. Ron, still nearby, shifted his weight like he regretted how casual he'd been explaining it earlier. I mean, Ron started then stopped choosing his words. It wasn't like anyone tied him down or anything, his brother made the call. Ben shook his head, still doesn't sound like he was in a state to agree. Will didn't add anything right away, he just kept holding the phone. The storage room felt colder now, even though nothing had physically changed. After a moment Will typed again. Will typed he was asleep, so he didn't understand what happening. Ron sighed softly, look, I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm just saying that's how it went down. Ben glanced at the power chair again, then back to Will. Feels like he's getting decisions made around him instead of for him, Ben said. The hallway behind them stayed loud with celebration, but none of it reached this moment. Will lowered his phone slightly. And for the first time since everything started, nobody was joking about Tom. Will stopped in the hallway just outside the storage room and typed, his thumbs moving faster this time. Will typed, my dad call Rachel, and not even 24 hours later his brother David pick up Tom and not taking his power chair. Ben read it and let out a slow breath. Yeah, Ben said quietly, that's all happening way too fast. Ron, leaning on the counter nearby, looked between them. I'm telling you, Ron said, it all got sorted in like a day. Family came in, paperwork got signed, and he was gone. Ben frowned, but he didn't really process any of it. Will didn't look up from his phone. Will typed Tom was asleep, he didn't understand anything happening to him. That sentence hung there longer than the others. Ron didn't argue this time, he just nodded a little slower. Yeah, he admitted, he was out of it, it was early morning, everything happened quick. Ben crossed his arms, that doesn't feel right. The noise from the party downstairs drifted up the hall again, laughter, music, celebration, but it felt disconnected from what they were talking about. Will looked down the corridor where Tom's room used to be. Will typed, everything happened to him without him really knowing. Ron exhaled through his nose, quieter now, that's kind of how it went down. Ben shook his head slightly, yeah, and now everyone's celebrating it. For a moment nobody spoke. The building was loud again. But that hallway was. Ben stepped a little closer to the counter, his tone more serious now. Do you have David's number? Ron shook his head immediately. After today, he disconnected it straight after the transfer paperwork. Ben frowned harder, so like a burner phone situation. Ron gave a small shrug, feels like it, everything was moving fast, calls, signatures, pickup, then gone. Will typed watching both of them. Will typed like they don't want contact anymore. Ron didn't deny it. Ben exhaled slowly, and both parents just blocked communication. Ron leaned back slightly, I can't say blocked exactly, but they stopped answering everything from our side too. A quiet pause followed. The party noise downstairs still echoed faintly, but it didn't feel connected to this conversation anymore. Ben shook his head, that's not normal. Ron replied carefully, in situations like this, sometimes families just want a clean break. Will's grip tightened on his phone again. Will typed, Tom is the one left behind in all this. Ron looked down for a second before responding, yeah. No one added anything after that. Because there wasn't much else that made it sound better. Ron leaned on the counter, clearly more frustrated now than before. What even gets me mad, he said, is the wheelchair they left him with. Ben looked up, what about it? Ron shook his head. It's one of those basic manual ones, no power assist, no self-propelling wheels, nothing. He can't move himself independently at all in it. Will's expression tightened as he typed. Will typed, they removed his independence. Ron nodded, that's what it feels like. Ben frowned, why would they downgrade him like that? Ron exhaled. Paperwork said temporary transfer set up, but nothing about a replacement, no power chair, nothing equivalent. He paused, then added, his phone was on the bed when I went in earlier too. That's actually why I called, thought something was off. Will typed again slower. Will typed so he can't move and no phone with him. Ron nodded once. Yeah, that's the situation as it stands. Ben ran a hand over his face. That's not just inconvenient, that's isolating. Ron didn't argue this time, he just looked down the hall. The celebration noise downstairs suddenly felt wrong against what they were hearing now. Will stared toward the direction Tom had been taken earlier, then lowered his phone slightly. And for a moment nobody spoke, because all the jokes from before didn't fit anymore. Ben took a step back from the counter and held up the phone Ron had mentioned, turning it on. The screen lit up, but only for a second before it hit the setup screen. Ben frowned. It's formatted. Will looked up immediately. Will typed they wiped it. Ron's expression tightened. Yeah, that tracks. It came through as a reset device when I saw it on the intake list. Ben stared at the blank setup screen, thumb hovering like he expected something else to appear. So there's nothing on it? Ben asked. Ron shook his head. Nothing, no contacts, no messages, no history. Will typed again slower now. Will typed so he lost everything in one day. Ron didn't answer right away. Ben lowered the phone slightly. That's not just a transfer, that's a full reset. Ron exhaled. Paperwork says device sanitization before discharge, standard policy for some cases. Ben snapped his head up. That sounds clinical, not human. Ron didn't argue. Will looked down at the blank phone screen in Ben's hand. No photos, no names, no trace. Just setup instructions. Ben handed it back slowly, like he didn't want to hold it anymore. He's basically starting over with nothing, Ben muttered. The hallway stayed loud downstairs, but up here it felt like a different world entirely, quiet, stripped down, and empty in a way that didn't feel like celebration anymore. The noise from downstairs was still fatting in the background when the elevator doors slid open again. David stepped out. He looked slightly out of breath, holding a small bag in his hand. I forgot Tom's meds, he said, scanning the hallway like he was expecting a quick handoff. Ben immediately straightened up. You came back for that. David nodded. Yeah, I got halfway out and realized. Will looked between them, then typed carefully. Will typed he needs them with him. Ron, still at the counter, pushed off it slightly. They weren't included in the original transfer bag. David shook his head. No, I packed fast, morning was hectic. Ben frowned, so he left without his meds, phone wiped, and no proper wheelchair setup. David paused for half a second, then shrugged. It was an early move, everything was coordinated quickly. Will didn't type immediately this time. He just watched David place the bag down on the counter. Ron took it and checked the label quickly. All right, I'll log it and send it over with transport. David nodded. Good. Ben crossed his arms. You realize how that sounds, right? David looked at him. I realize it sounds messy, it's not ideal. Will finally typed again. Will typed, Tom keeps losing things that belong to him. The room went quiet for a moment. David glanced toward the hallway, then back at them. He's still getting settled, he said, but his voice sounded less certain than before. Downstairs the celebration continued. But up here, it didn't feel like anything to celebrate. David stood at the counter, taking the medication bag back from Ron and tightening his grip on it. He doesn't need the phone or chair, David said flatly. He needs his meds, thank you. Ben blinked, that's it. Will stared at him, then typed. Will typed, what about his free will? The air shifted immediately. David sighed like the question was inconvenient. It's our religion now, he said, as if that explained everything. Can I go? Ron frowned. Dude, talk to your resident about freedom of religion. David shook his head. No, I mean, this is how we handle it in our family, it's decided. Ben stepped forward slightly. Decided by who? He's an adult. David didn't answer that directly, he just adjusted the meds in his hand again. I'm not doing this argument, he muttered. He's getting care, that's what matters. Will's thumbs moved fast. Will typed, care without choice isn't care. Ron went quiet at that. Ben looked between them, frustrated. you can't just override someone and call it care. David exhaled sharply. Look, I'm not here to debate philosophy, I'm here to fix what I forgot. He turned slightly toward the elevator. I'm going now. And just like that, he left again, meds in hand, conversation unfinished. The hallway stayed still for a moment after the doors closed. Ron finally muttered, quieter than before, that was not how that should have gone. Ben didn't respond right away. We'll just look down the empty corridor where everything kept moving, but nothing really felt settled. The noise from downstairs was still fatting in the background when the elevator doors slid open again. David stepped out. He looked slightly out of breath, holding a small bag in his hand. I forgot Tom's meds, he said, scanning the hallway like he was expecting a quick handoff. Ben immediately straightened up. You came back for that. David nodded. Yeah, I got halfway out and realized. Will looked between them, then typed carefully. Will typed he needs them with him. Ron, still at the counter, pushed off it slightly. They weren't included in the original transfer bag. David shook his head. No, I packed fast, morning was hectic. Ben frowned, so he left without his meds, phone wiped and no proper wheelchair setup. David paused for half a second, then shrugged. It was an early move, everything was coordinated quickly. Will didn't type immediately this time. He just watched David place the bag down on the counter. Ron took it and checked the label quickly. All right, I'll log it and send it over with transport. David nodded. Good. Ben crossed his arms. You realize how that sounds, right? David looked at him. I realize it sounds messy, it's not ideal. Will finally typed again. Will typed, Tom keeps losing things that belong to him. The room went quiet for a moment. David glanced toward the hallway, then back at them. He's still getting settled, he said, but his voice sounded less certain than before. Downstairs, the celebration continued. But up here, it didn't feel like anything to celebrate. Will lingered by the counter for a moment, then typed slowly, like he was trying to choose words that wouldn't make things worse. Will typed, sorry, Ron. Ron looked over, his expression softening a bit. He gave a small shake of his head. I get it, Ron said, but he's Tom's family, not you, my hands are tied. Ben leaned on the wall nearby, still clearly bothered by everything he'd heard. That doesn't make it feel any less wrong. Ron let out a tired breath. I know. A short silence settled between them. The noise from downstairs, music, laughter, celebration, felt distant now, like it belonged to a different situation entirely. Ron straightened a little, slipping back into his work voice. All I can do is document what I see, that's it. Will nodded slightly, then typed again. Will typed, I just don't want him to be alone in it. Ron paused at that. Yeah, he said quietly, neither do I. Ben pushed off the wall. So what happens now? Ron glanced down the hallway toward where Tom had been taken earlier. Now it's technically out of our hands. The words landed heavy. Will lowered his phone slowly. And for the first time that day, nobody had a quick answer for what came next. Ben stepped closer and gently took the phone from Will's hand, giving him a small, steady look. Will, Ben said softer now, I'll drive you home. Will paused for a second, then nodded. Will typed, okay. Ben gave a short breath out, like that was the first simple thing that had happened all day. All right, he said, come on then. Ron watched them for a moment from the counter, then gave a small nod too, tired but understanding. Get some air, Ron added, you both need it. Ben guided Will toward the elevator. The building was still loud downstairs, music, voices, movement, but up here the hallway felt quieter with each step. Will didn't look back this time. The doors opened. They stepped in. And for once they weren't running toward anything, just away from the noise toward home. Ben and Will got back home later that day. The drive had been quiet. Ben kept one hand on the wheel while staring out the window, replaying everything in his head. When they stepped inside, Todd was already there, leaning on the kitchen counter like he'd been waiting for answers. You two got what you needed? Todd asked. Ben let out a short breath. Everything was for religious reasons, apparently. Todd's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's not an explanation, that's a label. Will rolled his wheelchair in and typed, slower this time. Will typed, no power chair, no phone, that family got to be in a cult. The room went quiet for a second. Ben didn't immediately disagree, but he also didn't fully agree. Todd crossed his arms, careful with that word. Will looked up at him. Todd continued, calmer now. People can do messed up things without it being a cult, doesn't make it less serious though. Ben leaned against the counter. Serious is an understatement. The guy got no way to contact anyone, no proper mobility setup, and decisions are being made while he's half asleep. Todd exhaled slowly. Then the problem isn't the label, it's the situation. Will typed again more quietly. Will typed he didn't get a say in any of it. Todd nodded once, that part matters. A silence settled again, heavier than the drive home. Ben glanced at Will, so what now? Todd looked between them. Now you document what you saw, and if it's as bad as you think, it doesn't stay just a story you're telling each other. Will lowered his phone slightly. And for once, the situation felt less like something already finished, and more like something that still had consequences coming. Ben leaned against the counter, shaking his head like he was still trying to piece it together. The brother put his phone on Ron's desk, he said. Will paused, then typed quickly. Will typed, I didn't see that. Ben pointed lightly toward him. You were there, you were yelling at the man. Will frowned a little, confused. Ben sighed. You were saying all that stuff, free will, consent, all of it. You were right in his face about it. Todd, listening from the kitchen, looked over more seriously now. You were confronting him. Ben nodded. Yeah, it was tense. Will lowered his gaze to his hands on the wheelchair controls. The room quieted for a moment. Then Will typed again, slower. Will typed, I was just trying to stop it feeling wrong. Ben's expression softened a bit. I know, I'm not blaming you. Todd stepped closer, voice calmer now. You were reacting to what you saw, that's normal. Will didn't respond right away. Ben added, but it wasn't really in our control. That part landed heavier. Because everyone in the room knew that, even if nobody liked it. Todd grabbed a pull-up from the hallway closet and looked toward Will. Will, room. Will looked up immediately and typed. Will typed, I am dry. Todd nodded once but stayed calm. Did you ask Ben to use the bathroom before you left? Will hesitated for a second. Will typed, no. Todd pointed toward the hallway. In the room then. Ben quietly stepped back toward the kitchen, giving them space without saying anything. Will rolled toward his room slowly, clearly tired from the day more than anything else. Todd followed behind him carrying the pull-up, his voice calmer now that the chaos from earlier was over. You can't ignore it just because your head's somewhere else, Todd said, long day or not. Will stopped at his bedroom doorway and looked down for a second before typing again. Will typed, I know. Todd gave a small nod. All right, let's get settled down. The house felt quieter than the hospital had all day. No music, no shouting, no nurse call buttons. Just exhaustion finally catching up to everybody. Bates sat at the kitchen table while Ben grabbed a drink from the fridge, still thinking about everything from earlier. She noticed the look on his face and sighed softly. Ben, sometimes he forgets, Bates said, and he hates actual diapers. Ben looked over, so pull-ups. Bates nodded, yeah, during the day he'll wear pull-ups because they feel more normal to him. Ben leaned against the counter, then why the nighttime diapers? Bates gave a small shrug. Because they hold a lot more. Ben nodded slowly, finally understanding. He gets embarrassed about it, he asked. Bates looked toward Will's room down the hallway. Very, she admitted, he'd rather stay uncomfortable than ask for help sometimes. The house stayed quiet for a moment after that. Not awkward quiet, just tired quiet. Ben glanced down the hallway too. Today probably didn't help. Bates shook her head lightly. No, watching somebody lose control of their life like that, she paused, that sticks with you. From Will's room came the soft sound of a drawer shutting, while Todd helped him settle in for the night. Ben exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said quietly, I think everybody's carrying something after today. Bates looked over at Ben after a long stretch of silence in the kitchen. Ben, she said softly, thanks. Ben looked up from the counter, for what? Bates gave a tired little smile. For staying calm today, for helping Will, for not making him feel stupid when he gets overwhelmed. Ben shrugged awkwardly, clearly not used to being thanked seriously. I mean, somebody had to help. Bates shook her head lightly. A lot of people walk away when things get complicated. That sat with him for a second. Ben glanced toward the hallway where Will's room door was partly closed. He was really upset about Tom, Ben admitted quietly. Bate nodded, because he saw someone lose control over their own life. That scares people more than they admit. Ben rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't know what to say half the time. You didn't have to, Bate replied, you stayed. The house remained calm and dimly lit, the chaos from earlier finally far away. Ben gave a small nod. Yeah. Todd came back out of Will's room holding a bundled-up pull-up in one hand and looking completely done with the day. Bate, he said bluntly, fuck the pull-up. Bate looked up immediately, you good. Todd exhaled hard and rubbed his forehead. Will just shit himself, diapers full-time now. The room went quiet. Ben awkwardly looked away toward the kitchen like he suddenly wanted to be anywhere else. Bate stood up calmly, already switching into problem-solving mode instead of reacting emotionally. Then she looked at Ben gently. Ben, you need to go now. Ben nodded quickly, yeah, okay. Todd pointed toward the hallway closet with the pull-ups still in his hand. Take those pull-ups with you. Ben blinked, what? Todd shook the bundle slightly. Somebody else can use them, we're done pretending these work overnight. Bate gave Todd a look halfway between exhausted and amused. You are not making medical decisions, angry. Todd muttered back, I'm making laundry decisions. From down the hallway, Will's bedroom door stayed shut. The house had gone from tense to tired in the span of one evening. Ben grabbed his hoodie quietly. Tell Will I'll text him tomorrow, he said softly. Bate nodded once. And for the first time all day, nobody argued. Bate came out of the bathroom carrying the used pull-up bag with a tired expression on her face. After seeing the mess and the leak, she quietly walked to the hallway closet, grabbed the unopened packs of pull-ups, stuffed them all into the same trash bag and tied it shut. Then she carried the whole thing outside and dropped it into the bin. Will watched from his bedroom doorway, face burning with embarrassment. He quickly typed on his phone. Will typed, this not fair, sorry. Todd looked over at him immediately. This isn't punishment, Todd said firmly. Will looked down. Todd walked closer, lowering his voice a little. You didn't do something wrong, the pull-ups just aren't working anymore. Bate came back inside, wiping her hands on a towel. It's about keeping you comfortable and clean, she added gently, that's it. Will still looked upset. Will typed, I hate it. Todd nodded once, I know. There wasn't any teasing in the room, no jokes, just exhaustion and honesty after a really long day. Bate sat down beside Will's doorway. You're allowed to hate it, she said softly, but hating it doesn't change what your body needs. Will stayed quiet after that, gripping the phone in both hands. And for once, nobody tried to force him to feel okay about it immediately. Henry stepped into the hallway after hearing voices from Will's room. Everything okay? He asked carefully, looking between Bate and Todd. Todd let out a tired breath and leaned against the wall. Your brother had an accident, Todd said plainly, and now he hates the outcome. Will immediately grabbed his phone, typing fast with shaky hands. Will typed, I didn't know, please leave right Henry. Henry looked caught off guard for a second. Will, I wasn't trying to. Todd gently cut in before it could turn into an argument. Henry, Todd said calmly, give your brother some air. Henry looked toward Will again, seeing how overwhelmed he was, then nodded slowly. All right. He backed away from the doorway without pushing it further. Tell me if you need anything, he said quietly before walking off down the hall. The room settled again after he left. Will kept staring down at his phone, embarrassed and exhausted all at once. Bate stayed seated nearby while Todd spoke softer this time. Nobody's mad at you. Will didn't answer immediately. The day had taken almost everything out of him already, and this just felt like one more thing he couldn't control. Will's hands shook as he typed harder this time, frustration finally boiling over after the entire day. Will typed, not feral, I was trying to help someone else, this what happened, WTF. The room went silent after that. Todd looked at the message, then at Will, not angry, not disappointed, just seeing how overwhelmed he really was. Bate spoke first, calm and steady. Bad things happening to you doesn't mean you were wrong for caring about somebody else. Will looked away immediately. Todd nodded slowly. You didn't cause this by helping Tom. Will hit the side of his wheelchair lightly in frustration. Bate continued softly, your body needing more support tonight isn't karma, it's not punishment, and it's not because you tried to help somebody. For a second, Will looked like he wanted to argue anyway. Then Todd crouched slightly so he was more at eye level. You had an exhausting day, Todd said. You got stressed, distracted, overwhelmed, and you missed your own needs. That happens sometimes. Will's breathing slowed a little, but he still looked embarrassed. Will typed, I hate needing help. Todd answered honestly. I know, but needing help doesn't make you weak. Bate reached over and squeezed Will's shoulder gently. And helping someone else today still mattered, she added, even if everything else felt messy. The anger in the room faded a little after that, replaced by plain exhaustion. And for the first time since coming home, Will stopped trying to fight every word people said to him. Will rolled slowly down the hallway in his power chair until he reached Henry's room. The door was still partly open. Henry looked up from his bed when he saw him there. For a second neither of them said anything. Then Will held up his phone. Will typed, Yo bro, my day was all bad and it was worsey. I used the bathroom on myself. I was just embarrassed and you came into my room. I took all of it out on you, I am sorry. Henry read the message twice before answering. His expression softened immediately. Will, it's okay. Will looked down, clearly still embarrassed. Henry shook his head. Seriously, I didn't know what was going on, I just heard voices. Will stayed near the doorway, hands resting awkwardly on the wheelchair controls. Henry sat forward a little. You don't gotta apologize for being overwhelmed. Will typed again, shorter this time. Will typed, still shouldn't yell. Henry gave a small shrug, probably not, but I've had bad days too. That got the tiniest smile out of Will. Henry noticed immediately and pointed at him. There, that face, keep that one. Will rolled his eyes dramatically. Better, Henry said. The tension from earlier finally eased a little between them. Not fixed completely, just lighter. And after everything that happened that day, lighter was enough for now. Henry brightened a little, trying to shift the mood. Wanna watch a movie? He asked. Will paused, then gave a small nod and typed. Will typed, put me on the sofa. Henry got up right away. Yeah, I got you. He moved carefully, helping guide Will's power chair into the living room and positioning him so he could transfer comfortably onto the sofa. Will shifted over, settling in with a quiet breath like his body was finally catching up with the day. Henry grabbed a blanket and tossed it over him lightly. There. Will adjusted himself a bit, then looked at Henry. Henry grabbed the remote and flopped down at the other end of the couch. What ray we watching? He asked. Will thought for a second, then typed. Will typed, anything not about hospital. Henry snorted, fair enough. He started scrolling through options. The room finally felt still in a different way, not tense, just quiet. No call buttons, no hallway noise, no arguments. Just a movie waiting to start, and a long day slowly fading into something softer. Will sat on the sofa with his bear pulled close to his chest, still tired but a little more settled than earlier. He typed quickly, like he didn't want the moment to slip away. Will typed, right now I feel good. Todd looked over from the kitchen, arms folded. Rain check, he said firmly but not unkind. You done for tonight. Will frowned slightly, holding on to the moment. He grabbed his bear tighter and typed again. Will typed, I feel good, just put it on. Henry, sitting nearby with the remote, hesitated a second and then clicked play anyway. The movie started. Todd didn't argue further, just watched for a moment, making sure Will was actually settled, then relaxed a bit himself. All right, Todd said quietly, but you're done pushing yourself tonight. Will didn't reply, just leaned back into the sofa with his bear as the opening scene rolled. For the first time that day, nobody was arguing, nobody was calling anyone, and nobody was rushing anywhere. Just a movie and a rare quiet that actually stayed quiet. After the movie ended, the room was dim and quiet, the credits still rolling on the TV. Tom's voice came from the hallway, softer than before. Will, after you change, we'll put you in bed. Will gave a tired thumbs up from the sofa, still holding his bear. Todd was already gathering things from the kitchen, glancing over at Will's device. Your device is dying, Todd said, batteries low. Will looked down at it, the screen dimming slightly. He typed anyway. Will typed, okay. Henry stood up from the couch and stretched, I'll help get things ready. Todd nodded, good, let's keep it simple tonight. The energy in the room had fully shifted now. No more tension, no more arguments, just tired routine settling back in. Will slowly pushed himself up from the sofa, still holding his bear under one arm. Nothing dramatic. Just the end of a long day finally arriving. Will paused near the hallway, holding his bear close. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels heavy after a long day instead of peaceful. He looked up toward Todd. Then he signed slowly, a little tired but sincere. Dad, thanks for today. Todd stopped what he was doing for a moment. He didn't make a big deal out of it, just nodded once, steady and calm. You don't have to thank me, Todd said softly, but I hear you. Henry leaned against the wall nearby, watching the moment without interrupting. Will lowered his hands again, still holding onto his bear. For once, nobody added anything extra. No advice, no corrections, no arguments. Just a simple acknowledgement in a house that had finally gone quiet.